online, and also some other people. So, right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Paul and
Renee.
Yeah, Renee. Take it away.
Cool. Look, thank you very much, councillors. Gone too far. Not working. Thank you. That's better. All right, so the traffic, afternoon councillors, the traffic resolution for the Newtown and Berhampore parking scheme was due to go to Regs Committee today, but when we were sitting through both the oral submissions and questions that came up in other conversations, it was quite clear that a briefing would be advantageous to councillors ahead of debating this at committee. And so we've pushed this out 2 weeks, so this will now come back to Regs Committee in a special meeting on the 18th of this month, so in 2 weeks today. And today is just an opportunity for us to brief on that paper. I'm hoping that it's about a 20-minute briefing and there are not lots of opportunities for questions of us. So I'll run through most of the presentation about sort of how we got here and the changes that we're proposing to come before you on the 18th. Renee will run through the way the scheme's proposed to operate in terms of that customer interface. And then when we open the questions, we'll invite both Vida and Kevin to come to the table and the rest of the team. Cool. So just a bit of a reminder really of Berhampore and Newtown, some of our busier suburbs in the city, very frequent bus service and very well patronised bus service through these suburbs.
Excuse me, Paul, sorry to interrupt, but the Mayor's just said that she can't see the presentation slides. Are we able to, sorry. Sorry, what was the answer there?
Yep, they're fixing it back.
Oh, it's just, okay, we're just getting that fixed, Tori. So hopefully that will only be a minute or two. So, can you just wave or give us a thumbs up, give me a thumbs up when it's visible? Yeah, okay.
It's good.
Cool. Sorry, Paul, could you just, yes, maybe start again? Sorry.
I think they could probably hear me. There was nothing on that first slide.
All right.
That, so we'll just...
Okay, no, that's good, then carry on.
Cool, we'll carry on. So look, the top circle sort of highlights some of the better parts of the suburb, like it works really well. We see a high number of people using public transport, active modes to and from the suburb. But the open circles, just things that lead us to perhaps we could do better. There's a high parking occupancy. We know that our surveys have showed that while there's lots of car parks, they get used heavily. The suburb itself has just the way it was developed. There's not a lot of off-street parking available for our residents. And it's probably one of the biggest suburbs outside of the CBD where people drive into as a commuter. So yes, there is very few driving out of the suburb, which is really, really good, but there's a lot of people drive into the suburb for the hospitals and other facilities that are available. I made the point in that last one just being an abundance of all-day free parking. And I just really wanted to highlight that. And it gets really well used. I'm struggling with this. Cool, it's working out. Yep. Look, parking in Newtown's been a long-standing issue, longer than what I've put on this timeline. But I'll take you through some of the milestones into some of the more recent years, but many things we've left off of this, including all the work that was done around Let's Get Wellington Moving and potential for mass rapid transit through this corridor and how that's been influenced through this community. So in 2018, as part of our Newtown Connections work, we engaged with the community on a number of options of how we might move people on bikes from the suburb of Island Bay to the south right through to the city. And the graphic there shows the number of options that we looked at. And when we were engaging with the community on each of those options, they had an impact on parking. And while we understood what the impact looked like, the mitigation for that impact was not well understood at that point, and really highlighted the need for us to go and develop a parking management plan to support any removal, no matter which one of those routes was favoured as our preferred route. So again, in 2019, as part of that Newtown Connections work and better understanding the impact on parking, coupled with the development of the parking policy, which was in full swing in 2019, we undertook a really comprehensive parking survey, probably the most comprehensive residential parking survey this city has undertaken. To the right of the graphic, you can see all of the different time slots that each one of those parking spaces, so the 4,500 spaces in that area, was surveyed. So down the right there, it's got about 15 different time intervals in which surveyors were out there with clipboards measuring who was parking where. Invaluable survey, as we've since learnt. And I preluded that the parking policy was in development in 2019. In 2020, we went out and consulted on that, and you'll recall that that was the year that COVID interrupted a lot of things. So we did quite a comprehensive engagement. It went for 6 months because we were in and out of lockdown and the like. But it was adopted by council in August of that year. And it was Wellington's probably first comprehensive parking policy. We'd had loose references to the way we were managing parking and who had priority, but this was the first time we had a comprehensive way, including setting out how we would manage parking in different parts of the city. Now, this is one of the few levers that we've got that we're able to use to achieve our Te Atakura goals, and that leads us towards becoming an eco-city. And it embeds the transport hierarchy. It went as far as saying the detail of how we might address the city fringe and inner city suburbs. So it spells out quite specifically how we would do that. And I've highlighted a section of the policy there, and it spells out particularly that this would be applicable to Newtown. The policy was the first signal that we were going to move away from the traditional residence parking schemes that we had in place. So for 40 years, we've had exclusive residence parking zones throughout the city. But this policy moves away from being exclusive and allows other members of the public to use the public road, but for a limited time. And there's a big shift in that, in adopting that policy. And I know there's questions that were raised by councillors. I'm looking at Councillor Chung specifically to our submitters, who were asking about a residence parking scheme versus a time-restricted residence exempt scheme. And this was a deliberate part of the policy that has guided us to develop this Newtown scheme as per that policy. We've been working with the hospital, and while we've put the hospital there in 2021, actually our work with the hospital has been going a lot longer than that. But in 2021, they've developed their most recent travel action plan, so a workplace travel plan for their staff. It's not for how our patients or their visitors might get to and from the hospital, but particularly focused on the 5,000 or more staff that call that place their work. When I say we've been working alongside Greater Wellington Regional Council, so the two councils and the hospital have been working to develop this thing. Within that, the parking inside the campus is now managed through a parking scheme of their own, and they have an eligibility criteria. So they allocate the parks for the most in need. So the further they need to travel, they get it. So those that are within walking or cycling distance or on a major bus route don't get the same priority to get a park inside the grounds as those that might live further afield. And we heard a lot from that through both our written and oral submissions. They've had tremendous success with the HX service, the express bus that runs from the railway station to the Newtown Hospital. It runs on the quays, and I've got a little insert there in the slide. that it suffered a little bit through the bus driver crisis, if that's what it was, and that was one of the first services that got pulled when there was limited drivers around. So they took and expected that commuters from the Wellington railway station going to the hospital would just catch the number 1 service. We can say that that's now reinstated, and the most recently, they're getting now continuous use of that service, and the patronage is continuing to increase. So then in early 2022, we brought a paper, so this was after adoption of the parking policy, we brought a paper to committee at the request of committee, and that was to the EIC committee, wanting an update on the rollout of the actions in the parking policy. So that brought which parking management plans we were bringing, and we signalled there that, confirming that Newtown was first, and that there was a range, and I think there was another 19 suburbs or parking management plans requested of councillors, and we prioritised those. But we did indicate that Wadestown would be the next area to be done, and through this briefing we can say that we're expecting to undertake the consultation on that parking scheme in June of this year. Cool, and of course, last year we developed our project proper started actually in 2022. We combined that with the Berhampore and Newtown bus, bike and pedestrian improvement project. We sought community input through how things are working community survey. So we've got that there. So that was our first time we went out to the community, and that was not just how things are working for the bus, bike and walk project, but how things are working on parking, and a comprehensive feedback from the community to enable us to develop our scheme. We engaged on our first design of this back in 2023, October 23, and we had over 1,100 submissions. And that was combined with that walk, bike, bus improvements. And we made a number of changes as a result of what we heard, and those changes are there. With the big ones being the shift towards the 3R, and I'll cover those in more detail in this shortly. And then in February this year, we undertook consultation on the traffic resolution that on the change scheme, and we received almost 500 submissions on that. So now we've caught up. That's all the stuff we've done in the past. Now we're here and thinking about what we then bring to Regs Committee in 2 weeks' time, seeking approval to. So the first design we had was the 2-hour scheme that was built up of that community survey we did, the occupancy surveys that we observed on the street, and the parking policy. And that guided us towards a 2-hour time restriction, 7 days a week, throughout those 3 zones. And you can see in those highlighted green bubbles the percentage of car parks we were going to restrict in each area. But it was that 2 hours, 7 days a week. The feedback we got on that was interesting. So unsurprisingly, the short stay visitors thought the scheme was great. It's provided 2-hour car parks across most of the area. Lots of ability for short stay turning around. That was good, as we expected. Commuters, again, unsurprisingly, was negative because it had an impact upon, or a perceived impact upon those that were driving into the suburb. And so we certainly need to do more work in that space. But one that surprised us the most was the negative feedback we got from the residents, given that they were the beneficiaries of the scheme. That was quite a surprise, the level of less than desirable support for it. Costs seem to be the biggest issue there, and loosely also was the maximum of 2 car parks, or 2 permits per household. But costs seem to be the major driver. So we're bringing this to the EIC committee on the 30th of November last year. The biggest change that was made collectively, this is both the officer recommendations and the amendments that were made by committee. The biggest change was moving from a 2-hour scheme 7 days a week to a 3-hour scheme 5 days a week. With that change, and that was to address many of those concerns that we heard, and a delay to when we would introduce Newtown East, and that delay would be 12 months after Newtown West and Berhampore, and that would enable some of the actions that the hospital had in place to get up and running. It will allow the commuters that were travelling in to perhaps readjust their travel behaviour. But the committee agreed to a number of those minor amendments at the bottom, and I'll cover those off in the next few slides. But fundamentally, the committee agreed that we proceed to a traffic resolution. So we have now done that. So the second design that went out with the traffic resolution that we circulated has come from all that information we've had right back from that parking policy, those surveys, right through to what we heard in the second design, to what committee has told us. So gone out with effectively the same number of car parks, but with a 3-hour, 5-day-a-week scheme. We think now that with a few more minor changes, so that there's one significant change, but some minor changes to the scheme, that we're now ready to move towards implementation. So our recommendations that we're going to bring to Regs Committee in 2 weeks' time, because we didn't hear a lot of new concerns. We heard a lot less concerns than we did previously, only 500 this time, 500 submissions that is, and some in support, of course. We heard anecdotally that many people felt that their concerns the first time had been addressed and they didn't feel the need to submit again, and we got that from a number of our stakeholders, so it wasn't just individuals but stakeholders were telling us that as well. We heard a lot about addressing the bus problems first, but we're now seeing that the buses through this part of the city are now operating at 98% reliability. We've checked that again with most recent figures out of Greater Wellington. And so we think we have fixed the buses. Now, I think we're over that bus crisis. We are signalling quite a significant change in the way we deploy the scheme. Still recommending the same scheme, but the way in which we roll it out to address many of the concerns of the residents, particularly of the residents in the area. And we heard concerns about consultation and about the way we went about doing a consultation. This was the third time many people have been asked about parking in the area, the way people could feedback and the ability to learn information. We'll take those comments on board when we roll out the Wadestown scheme and other parking management schemes as we move forward. So we've got a number of options that committee to consider. I'm going to run through the second option, which is our recommended option, and it's the option that most aligns to the recommendation that EIC gave to officers. So we're not suggesting we move away from that, but there are other options you might wish to consider. All right, this probably needs a little bit of explaining about what you're looking at here. So I've got the 3 areas, Newtown West, Berhampore and East, in a timeline. We've got the decision in April and those purple diamonds. We can see that the Newtown West and Berhampore around June this year will be looking to implement the walk bike bus project through Rintle Street, Luxford Street and Adelaide Road. So it's going to remove parking from some of that. We want to have a parking scheme operating alongside that, so anybody that is displaced from where they currently park their car will have a receiving environment that has a parking scheme that can mitigate any negative effects of displacing their cars. We're recommending at this stage we put in a minor number of changes, so that thinner blue line is not all of the restrictions we consulted on, but some of the restrictions. You can see there towards the end of the year we've got a peach-coloured box. That's the review of those first 2. Committee and EIC in November last year instructed us to review the scheme before implementing any scheme in Newtown East. So that would be the review of the first two areas prior to us doing anything in Newtown East. However, we're suggesting that there be a further review 12 months after the introduction of the first scheme to look to whether we should put in more restrictions. So we will be seeking approval from committee to approve all of the traffic resolutions that we've consulted on, but only having part of them approved now and the rest approved in a phase 2, subject to us meeting some conditions. We're suggesting there in the green diamond that decision to put in the remaining restrictions be done by the ELT member responsible. So in this case, it's Liam Hodgetts would make that call. As officers, we would have to demonstrate we've met a certain threshold. So it's quite complicated in that respect. And then on the bottom line, Newtown East, I should have noted that the red part of that line is the residence parking schemes that currently exist in those areas would continue. So we continue in Newtown East with existing residence parking up until we put the scheme in Newtown East in mid-2025. And then, of course, we would review that before upping the numbers if needed. This is what it looks like. The blue boxes on here are the phase 1 restrictions. This is now, so we've consulted on both the blue and the red, and we asked the community to restrict all of those spaces to 3 hours, Monday to Friday, and we've had feedback on those. And amongst the coloured in boxes, you can see there's a number of spaces that are not highlighted. They are the unrestricted spaces that we propose to leave there that the commuters would be able to use. One of the things I wanted to really highlight on this, though, is that everything, whether it be red or blue, is effectively what we observed in our parking surveys as being occupied by a resident plus a 15% margin for growth and for visitors to come from. So that's not taking car parks away from commuters. That's signalling those are the car parks that are currently occupied by a resident that the commuter can't get to. So there's an awful lot of these streets are currently full of residents. And we know that that residential demand is going to grow as we've adopted our district plan, and this is an area of intensification. Without the need to provide for off-street parking, the on-street parking demand from residents is going to continue to grow. So that was a snapshot in 2019 of how many cars were parked on the street. So I talked there about the phase 1 and the phase 2 restrictions. So I expect to get lots of questions on that because it takes a bit to get your head around. But so what we're suggesting of the 4,500 spaces that we've currently got in these all 3 areas, that initially we restrict almost 1,400 of them. And then we undertake that review of how well those spaces are being used, and if needed, we would increase that by up to another 840. But we would have some triggers in that. So those triggers, so the first one, sorry, the top bullet points refer to what we would do ahead of Newtown East coming on board. And this was a decision, amendment that was made at EIC that we review the first 2 areas. I'm not quite sure what the triggers or what we were reviewing and what we were asked to change based on what we saw, but we've inferred from that we would review the application data. If we get more applications for something like Hanson Street than we have spaces, then that's an indicator that there's more demand in Hanson Street than what we do of space. Maybe we put more in as part of it. Sorry, I've jumped ahead. No, this is just really looking at whether there is problems in the way Newtown West is operating. Yeah, so this isn't about how many spaces. That's one of the things we can do, though, is review our application process. We've made it pretty difficult for ourselves, the different ways in which we're assessing people into the different groups. It might be that that's actually overly complicated, and we can simplify things the next time around. So look, we'll take learnings from the first 2. Again, it won't come back to committee for approval. This is lies with officers just to undertake that review before Newtown East. So that's between stage 1 and stage 2. But the difference between phase 1 and phase 2 is whether we put those remaining restrictions out. And we have got a couple of triggers there. So one is that the applications that exceed 85% of the spaces available, street, area or zone, and we'll get that straight from the application data. We'll know how many spaces we've got in. This is my Hanson Street example. If we put 50 spaces into Hanson Street that were restricted and receive 85 permits, we'll go and put more spaces in. We can deal with that really easily. The second one, though, is the observed occupancy. If we're starting to see lots of visitors parking in these parks, we might need to put more in. And we've got some of those phase 2 restrictions that we're able to deal with without the need to go back for another round of traffic resolutions. Cool. So now moving to some of the feedback that we received from hospital users, both staff and visitors too, and where they would be able to find a car park. The red line is the hospital frontage, both on Ridderford Street and Meehan Street, and I've tried to demonstrate on here where the 5-minute walking distance, simply using Google Maps and just moving the end point out as far as I could with a recommendation of the 5-minute walk and the 10-minute walk. And then I've showed in those blue boxes how many current unrestricted spaces there are in there, acknowledging that many of them are filled with residents, and how many would be available under the phase 1 and how many would be available under phase 2. So we were estimating that within that 5-minute walking catchment, if you looked under phase 1, there's about 1,500 in Newtown East, so pretty evenly distributed. So 500 in that inner circle, 500 out to the 10-minute, and another 500 out to the zoo. So you could argue that there was, within 10 minutes, there would be about 1,000 unrestricted spaces under the phase 1 conditions, and more spaces available in Newtown West. Just quickly cover off the other options that would be available to committee if you didn't follow the recommended option. So, I mean, there's a myriad of options that you may follow, but one is do nothing. We can accept the submissions that were received from both the residents and commuters, and we choose to do nothing. What we would say there, though, is that if that is the option chosen by a committee, we would like some guidance as to how we could do that better, what you would like to see, and whether we then need to go back and review the parking policy. Because what we have provided is as per the policy, and if you don't choose it, give us some guidance as to what we need to do and a rewrite or a review of the parking policy. If you did nothing, the existing residents parking that operates in both Newtown West and Newtown East, they would continue to operate as they do now. A further option is put in all of the resolutions, but it's both phase 1 and phase 2, as per the traffic resolution we consulted on in January. That's just putting everything in. We've got a slight lag for Newtown East, so this is not delaying at 12 months. The slight lag is just a logistical exercise of managing permit applications, and that lag would be 6 to 8 weeks. So we would just get the first 2 areas out, and once we've assigned those permits, we would send out letters. It's just a logistics exercise, and to get the signs and markings installed. Another one is that we just accept the lower level, the phase 1 restrictions. I think the phase 1 would be appropriate for the short term, and then anything beyond that would have to be managed through a business as usual traffic resolution. So Zach's team and Transport and Infrastructure would pick up the odd request in amongst this. So no big formal review, no going back, just not leaving the residents in limbo whether they are going to get more put out later. This would be just a once and final decision of this committee, and then the rest dealt with through further amendments through a further traffic resolution process and more consultation with the community. And then the last option we want to provide here is that we believe that a parking scheme needs to be in place to mitigate the effects of the cycleway. As we displace cars from Rental Street, Luxford Street and Adelaide Road, we feel that we need to have an environment to receive them into those side roads. If you don't believe that's necessary. An option here is that we just wait and see. This would have us not make a decision by committee now. We defer a decision until after the cycleway has removed those car parking spaces. We then see the effects of that and bring a paper back to committee later in the year for you then to make a decision on. The drawback on that is that we lose a bit of trust and confidence with our community. All the engagement that we've done to date with that community that's going to have parking affected has said that we will have a scheme up and running to manage that displacement. And secondly, it would take some time. If committee were of a mind immediately after the introduction of the project to put in some traffic resolutions, it would take us some time to bring a paper to committee and then to get the signs and markings installed on the ground, get the permit processing up and running. And we think there's probably at least a 6-month lag from the time the parking was changed in those 3 streets until we could have a scheme up and operating. Cool. And then I've got about 3 or 4 more slides, and I'm conscious of my time. I said it was going to be 20 minutes. But you asked committee asked for officers to go away and investigate leasing, and leasing is not necessarily the appropriate word, car parking spaces in and around Meehan Street. You asked for 50 spaces. What I've shown here is the spaces that don't have a residential frontage. So we didn't think it would be appropriate to lease a car park or dedicate a car park to the hospital in front of somebody's home. So these are the spaces available to us that are non-residential frontage. There is some on the northern side that are already time limited, but I've got 49, so pretty close to the 50 you asked for, that would be available to lease to the hospital. Now, in the paper, we've made it clear that the hospital are interested in pursuing this, and the hospital are prepared to work around the $18 a day per space. So that's the rate in which we would get for that. You'll note that on the eastern side, on the southeastern side of that green line, we've probably got close to 10 spaces in front of the hospice. And I imagine that would cause some contention. The hospice have submitted and feel that the scheme itself is detrimental to their staff, and this actually has those car parks directly outside the hospital dedicated to the Wellington Regional Hospital staff, not the hospice staff. So we are trying to talk with the hospice to see how we could work around that. This would be subject to a second traffic resolution. So if committee are of a mind, they can instruct officers now to go away and develop this further through a traffic resolution process. Councillor Abdurrahman brought an amendment to committee when it moves. That one. Half price for low-income households, and absolutely we acknowledge we've been working really hard to see this through. The amendment we had there that, yes, we wanted to have half price if it was legal to do so. We've had some very, very strong evidence that it's not legal for this council to use a community services card to provide half price or any discount for any transport or parking related matters. Palmerston North City Council also fell into the same trap and have been using the community service card to offer discounts, in their case for housing, and they were now looking to use that same community service card to discounts for transport, and have came up against the same legal framework that doesn't allow that. They're recommending, Palmerston North City Council will be recommending to Local Government New Zealand through a remit to go back to central government to have that changed to allow local government to use a community service card to demonstrate for discounts across a range of services. Our recommendation is that we should support Palmerston North City Council's bid to Local Government New Zealand. Understand that Auckland City Council would also be supporting such a bid. Also in the bottom right there, we've just noted that although EIC in November approved both this half price here and the mobility permits being free, that they're also subject to your long-term plan fees and charges approval. the committee didn't have approval to drop those fees. So we've now put it through the long-term plan will be adopted through there, because you're offsetting who's paying that cost. So you're passing on the discounted cost to the general ratepayer. Almost there, Renee. And the last one, I just want to cover off car share, and it came through. So both our Wellington-based operators, Mevo and CityHop, operate out of Newtown now. Both have said they're really keen to continue to grow the Newtown Berhampore suburb for car share. We know that CityHop are interested in putting in more parking spaces if demand increases, and we think that the parking scheme itself, as we limit to a maximum of 2 per household, that might start getting households to think about the third or fourth vehicle associated with the property, and I think car share is a great way in which we can pick up that demand. So reducing car ownership and picking up the flex with car share. So just moving on, and then we'll get to questions.
Kia ora, councillors. If the parking plan is approved, we will begin the application process with residents and businesses within Newtown and Berhampore by the end of April. So we are looking to do letter drops to all 3 zones to let residents and businesses know the decision outcome, how it will affect them, and when to apply for a permit. They'll be able to go onto our website and submit an online application for a parking permit or for visitor day passes. This will provide them better self-management of their permits. They'll be able to activate the permits themselves, edit or cancel any of their permits as required. The parking team will then assess applications. We are going to then, we'll assess every application, and then at a certain point in time within the 6 weeks that we're opening applications for, we'll make the decision as to whether or not we have oversubscribed, so we've received more applications than we have parking spaces available on street. If that happens, we'll then apply the priority group allocations, which are set out in the policy, and then issue permits from the highest priority down to the lowest. Once applications are approved, customers will be able to pay online, either full or with instalments, and once issued, electronic permits will be issued based on a vehicle licence plate. If we don't reach the cap, we will continue to have applications open and continue to issue permits throughout the year. If an online application is not available for a particular resident, we do have an alternative option available where they'll be able to complete a manual application. Going back to the decision in November, which was to offer free mobility card holders a discounted or free permit, we've confirmed that that is possible. However, that is subject to an LTP decision similar to the low-income household discount. And then once we have all permits issued, we will then have our parking team rostered and deployed into Newtown, where we will be using a handheld to monitor all the parking areas, and they'll be checking licence plates to ensure they have a valid permit or not. And that's me.
For questions? Yeah, good. Councillor Matthews, I think, is first up. And then, yeah.
Thank you. So I had 2. The first one is, I mean, as was acknowledged a couple of times during the presentation, what is appearing to us is quite complicated. And I guess, and partly that the second part of the presentation, Renee, about the permits, but I guess I want to test, have we looked at how complicated the experience for residents will be of changes, and is that kind of part of our consideration? Because it's one thing for us to, and I understand why it's partly as a result of our own decisions, et cetera, but for residents, them, you know, experiencing confusion about what their entitlements are or how things will change around their neighbourhood.
both. Yeah, so I guess as part of the application process, there isn't a huge amount of change if you already apply for a permit. So you will complete the same process where you send us your information, evidence that you live at the address, and then all of the decision making about what category you are assigned to, that sits with the parking team. So from the customer's end, they won't necessarily see to that level of detail how we will end up categorising a particular application to a priority group. And what they'll receive is the outcome. Either it's a yes, you've been approved, and if you haven't met that criteria, then it may be declined, and we'd be able to explain why.
How about in terms of like those areas, that it's working this way now, but it might, it's going to change?
Yeah, so within the three zones, that's no different really than the likes of the Clifton zone against the Kelvin zone. So I think people quickly work out which their permit allows them to park in these streets, but if they cross this line, we've tried to draw those boundaries between the different zones in a logical place so that nobody's caught out of being, having to live there but have to park in the other zone and get ticketed because they're in the wrong zone. The signage, I think, will be very simple, very obvious. I mean, they're effectively a 3-hour car park with authorised residents exempt. We have those elsewhere in the city. I think that will be readable, be better for their visitors. There is a whole lot of other complications that sit in the background that we will need to work through, just quite a comprehensive FAQ and like how do visitors that stay overnight get a temporary permit and the like.
Thank you. And my other question is, deep in the recesses of my memory, I seem to recall that we sort of said that new housing developed under the new rules that didn't require off-street parking wouldn't be eligible for residents' car parking.
No, so that's not the case. They automatically go to the lowest category, so they are the first to miss out should we reach the cap. If we don't get as many applications as we have spaces, every application will get one, provided the first and second application for every household will get one. A third and fourth that apply wouldn't get one, even if we had room on the street. So anything more than 2 miss out, but a new build after 2020 goes to the bottom of that list. Yep.
Sorry, right, so Councillor O'Neill, then Councillor Chung, and then Councillor Calvert.
Kia ora, just to Pātai, so when you talk about phase 1 and phase 2, how are we going to measure the success? Are we using other measures other than just the number of applications for permits? Like taking word feedback or adjustments about where the blue zone and the red zone is on the street?
We're trying to be quite tangible, so we've only got 2 measures, and one there is that we receive more applications than we have space. And if we have some spaces available in our phase 2 area, we can deploy those. And the second is around the observed occupancy. So we wanted to steer away from doing a qualitative review, but look, if that is something that councillors feel strongly about, but there is a cost associated with that, we can do the other reasonably quickly and cheaply without having to do yet another survey of residents.
Yep, cool. And then just second really quick Pātai. So with the advice on community service card holders not being able to fit with a discount into the scheme, is there how will the payment plans work, or is there any way to get an indication from local residents that they are interested in a permit but can't afford one right now? And how can we kind of raise that flag and counting it as intent to get a permit, maybe in a few months or something like that?
In terms of the payment plans, so we do have instalments available if you apply online. As part of the options, when you get to pay is either in full, and then you'll be able to pay initially the equivalent of a 3-month permit at the beginning, and then monthly payments throughout. If residents choose not to get a permit and they want to wait, absolutely they could. There's still unrestricted parking on street that they could still use for their own personal vehicles. And then if they did choose to then apply later in the year, if there is space available, and I guess that's the key here, that if we haven't reached that cap and there is permits still available, they could, once they understand the changes and how that impacts them directly, they'll be able to then apply for a permit later.
So just further to Renee's comment there, the way in which we've moved the scheme, we think for the 2-hour scheme 7 days a week, it was appropriate to have most car parking spaces restricted for residents. As we moved away from that now, and the recommendation would be that we do the phase 1, so just about a third of the total area, about half of what we were proposing. That's going to free up a lot more spaces in the street, so residents won't feel compelled to sign up. So given it's a 3-hour scheme 5 days a week, we think there'll be a lot more residents that won't feel the need to actually buy a permit. It's really if you're coming and going during the business day regularly, that there may be some benefit in becoming a member of the scheme.
Thanks. Next up is Councillor Chung.
Great, thanks. How many questions can we have?
Oh, a couple.
A couple. Okay, I've got 4. That's 2 couples.
Yeah.
The first one is that we're taking the car parks out of Rental Street for the cycle lane. Is there any option with to not having that cycle lane, so that we don't remove those parks?
That project has been approved and is currently being constructed. So there'd be huge penalties if you wanted to change that with our contractor.
Yep, okay, thanks. Right, second question, $80 a day for the hospital to lease car parks. How does that compare with our revenue by not leasing them?
So the $18 a day reflects the rate of coupon parking. So if we look at the way this council has valued the parking spaces on the car parks immediately north of John Street, so a couple hundred metres north of the hospital, they are at $18 a day currently for a coupon park. Inside the scheme that we've developed, the residents are given a number of free permits for their guests. So not the visitors under 3 hours are free. Anybody that wants to be a guest for more than 3 is eligible to apply for one of the 50 free permits that they get. After that, the residents can have an unlimited number of permits at $18 a day. So the scheme is valued that the spaces in there are $18 a day for somebody that's going to park for longer than 3 hours. So that would be equitable to the hospital. Now, the fee on which the users from the hospital would pay may not be $18, and that's between the hospital and their staff as to how much the staff pay compared to how much the hospital pay.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
And we'll bring that back as part of a traffic resolution if that's a desire of the committee that we go and do that work.
Okay. Then regarding the permit allocation or the permit sold, how does that compare to the number of permit spaces there are available? Like, what's the ratio? Are we looking at, say,
it's very clear in the parking policy that different from the way we've administered the residence parking schemes that exist. Going forward, we'll only ever issue 85% of the available spaces in the zone.
Oh, I see.
In the zone, so it's not per street, and that's where. So you might get a street within the zone that gets a lot more higher allocation, and we want to be able to fix that through that adjustment.
Oh, good, thanks. And
No, I'm going to limit you there. You've had at least 2. We have got quite a few people on the list. Councillor Calvert, can I ask that questions and answers be kept as tight as possible?
Thank you, Councillor.
Of the approximately 4,500 car parks, can we have some other stats around how many properties there are? So that we, and whether it's residential or commercial, so that we can compare the context, provide some context?
We should be able to do that. The 4,500 are all against the residential frontages, so it doesn't include the commercial frontages of Ridderford Street.
Yes,
but we can give you that.
If you can, thank you. And I think it was on slide 2, you might have talked about discussing with the hospital, but can you just outline what stages, when have you discussed the situation of parking with the with the regional health precinct and government about the need for them to provide off-street parking?
So we've not done that at that level. So my involvement has been with their workplace travel plan and their parking administration team inside their organisation.
So we've had no conversations
I have
formal
not.
conversations. Okay. And I'll ask one more if I may, and then I'll
Yep.
go back
May
on the
I ask one
list. How do you think the options that you provided are going to be addressing the concerns raised by hospital staff that we heard through the, I know in the written ones, but in particular through the oral submissions?
We've done two things to address that. One is the progressing the work with the hospital themselves to increase the number of car parks that they have available to offer to their staff. So the 50 that we would look to lease, and I use that word as being not the correct word, but say that these 50 that we would provide on street increase the stock of car parks that the hospital have. So that's.
But we're
that's
taking
one.
those off somebody else, though. I mean, they're currently car parks.
Yep.
So it's
And-
not. Is that what you call
Well, they are
cost neutral
currently
or
parking.
something like that?
And
Net neutral?
the second way in which we're doing that is that by phasing the rollout is that we leave a lot more car parks available for general traffic, whether that be residents or commuters, to occupy.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I actually have myself next.
can I
and
just-
then Councillor Randall and then Councillor Brown. So the percentages, you talked about phase 2 and phase 1 and phase 2, but you also talked about general percentages in Newtown West, Newtown East and Berhampore. Like 35% would be restricted, for example. Does that mean the phase 1 is 35% and then phase 2 would actually add to that, or is that?
Yeah, so we're recommending that in Newtown West, for instance, only 45% of the spaces get restricted.
Is that
and that's in phase 1.
Okay.
And then subject to the review of phase 1, if that wasn't working, we would go back and would increase that up to the 70%.
Oh, I see. So phase 2 could be up to what was previously
Or up to what we
previous
consulted
number.
on. Yes.
Okay.
Can I just add to that one, Sarah? In the paper that's going to come to you, you will be approving what stage 2 is. So talking about Liam having that delegation, you'll be approving what a stage 2 looks like and what the basis is for implementing stage 2.
So the ELT
triggers.
decision would be more about the timing of
It's
that,
just
not about the quantum.
determining if and when we implement.
Okay. And my second question is, did the hospital, just referring a bit back to Councillor Calvert's point, did the hospital have a resource consent to build a car parking building at some stage? I believe they might have. In fact, they approved it in a committee meeting of the board before it disbanded. They actually approved building a car parking building.
Yeah, but I don't think
But
it
you
was with
don't.
consent.
But
I know that there is still work happening looking at a parking building.
And also there's been a hospital travel management plan for their staff, so I don't think they're totally unaware of the need to really consider, sharpen their ideas around their parking
Very much
requirements.
so, and the report goes into that in more detail.
So I don't think we've sprung this on them completely. That's, I suppose, my point.
And the parking scheme which they have implemented on site addresses some of the issues which we've also heard raised around some of those night workers, for example. So they have reserved spaces on site for the evening shifts for those people coming in.
All right. Thank you for that. Councillor Randall.
Not a question, but we'll have a copy of the slides being able to send around.
Yes, it's my understanding they'll be made available
Thank
after,
you. No,
after this.
so I think thank you for all the feedback and I think going slower is and checking. My question is, first of all, if the committee would rather it reserve the decision to proceed with each phase, is that that's an opportunity, that's a possibility that we could do through amendment. Is that correct?
Yes.
In terms of, you assume 15% growth, I mean, what is does that match up with the urban plan proposed growth for this area?
Look at, sorry.
Yep, it matches in with the FDS work that has been done at a regional level.
FDS, sorry.
The
means-
future development strategy, which is being developed at a regional level, and the data which we've inputted into that through our housing and business HBA. What's the A? Assessment. Thank you.
Yeah, because I got the sense that this corridor is really more slated for like doubling the population rather than 15% more. But anyway, and the last question is really around, is it in terms of leasing? Not leasing is the wrong word. Let's say a targeted allocation. Would there also be an opportunity for the hospice to perhaps engage with that?
Yes, absolutely. But we did hear, and there was a question I think that was made directly to the Chief Executive, would they be interested? And yes, they would be interested, but not at $18 a day, or maybe not at $18 a day. So I'm busy trying to flesh that out as to what that might look like.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, and then I think Deputy Mayor Foon also has a question. Councillor Brown first.
Thanks. Has the hospital made any further noises about the building a car park building? They said that they'd applied to the ministry for funding to enable them to do that. Have we heard anything?
Probably about 12 months ago, I undertook a gateway review with the hospital, and that was through Treasury just to look whether the conditions are met. I was invited back a fortnight ago for a second gateway review, so it's still alive and very much being worked on. So it is still with Treasury or with central government to look at where the funding for it might come from.
Is there anything you think we should do to try and push that at on behalf of Wellington? I mean, it does seem to me that obviously, health is in disarray, but I mean, this is a pretty simple decision. And I just wonder, is there anything we should be doing outside of the official channels such as you've described to push this along?
Look, I think if that is where this council wants to go and wants to prioritise the investment of, the hospital's investment of a parking building, we probably ought to do whatever we can to encourage them to do that.
Thanks. My second question is, I'm a massive fan of the plan, and I think you guys have done a great job. So, and I hope that we can actually roll this stuff out way more quickly, to the rest of Wellington, basically. But I mean, will the next cab off the rank, which I think you've said was Wadestown, although I don't understand why it's not Mount Victoria, but how quickly is that going to happen?
So Wadestown would consultation in June. And that's a combined consultation with the bike and walking improvements through that suburb as well. But they would be rolled out this summer.
Oh, so okay. So it'll take like 6 months before we can go to Woe on the next one.
Yep. This was far more complicated than Newtown.
Yeah. I can see.
Given that it was our first one, we didn't pick the easiest one. In the long-term plan, there's budget sitting there to address the likes of Mount Victoria in the next financial year, or in the coming 3 financial years.
Great. Okay. No, thanks for that. I think it's just fantastic what you've done.
Right, Deputy Mayor Foon, and then we've got Councillor Abdurrahman. How long are we going for? Just as this finishes at... Yeah, so we'll need to keep them really tight. Sorry, but we have run out of time a bit.
Just a couple from me. One is just at the hospital, I mean, how in touch, do they give us any data on how their own parking is utilised? And the reason why I ask is I came out of the Governor-General's house Tuesday last week, and their staff car park was empty at 7:30. So wondering... and is the reason that people don't want to pay for parking and it's because we are offering free parking that staff prefer to park on the street?
Yeah, so yes, the hospital do share with us a lot of their parking inventory data, and so we understand how it's been used and what's there. Currently, they're charging $7.50 a day. When they get to an upper threshold, and I forget where that threshold is, then their parking scheme allows them to increase that fee. So they always have spare spaces available, so that staff don't need to hunt. If they've paid the fee, they get a park. And it's likely that they'll be increasing that over the next few months, but that's their scheme for them to operate.
Yeah, no, it just helps to understand why parking on the street is so important. The next one was just the difference, and I'm sorry I missed the slide, but about the residence parking scheme that exists and the new parking plan. Can we just make sure that's really clear in the paper what the key differences are?
Yes, we'll do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All righty,
Thanks,
thank
Chair.
you. Councillor Abdurrahman.
Cool. I'm not asking questions. I'll save them for now. But are we?
It's about questions.
Yes,
so-
I'm going to ask you that question for now.
Okay.
And not are you going to organize as the chair of the committee? Because last time community members, they came here, they requested they want to meet the mayor and the committee members and other councillors. Are we going to organize a meeting for the community to have a say, because they know the area? We have seen on the map the red and the blue, the green and the yellow, but there are people who are going to be impacted on the ground, real impact, whether it's from cost-wise or whatever it is. And we have also seen from the briefing, there is no support from commuters, no support from residents, no support from businesses. And that I'm not using my own words, I'm using the officer's word. And
So,
are you organizing a meeting?
The answer to that is we have had the consultation for stage one, and then we recently had, as you know, a whole lot of people come to us, and as a result of both of those, we have iteratively arrived at where we are. So there have been further changes that have been made by the staff in response to the last 500 submissions. And so no, we are not planning at this point to further consult. We now have to make decisions and communicate. We have to make the best decisions we can and communicate that in the best way we can and choose the best timeframes and the way to roll this out. And that's the point we've reached. So it's not really about further consultation at this point.
I will back it with evidence why people don't have enough information to vote on these things, and we will discuss that in the future.
Yeah,
Thank
sure. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I think that probably does bring us to the end, and I would like to thank, both of you, Paul and Renee, and of course, Liam and Vida and others for all the work that's gone into this, and it has indeed been a years-long process. Maybe one last question. What's the fallback option? Like, you always think, well, if you put this in and it doesn't work, because I can hear Nuridan's concerns, what is the fallback option? Like, we will be, I presume, monitoring this, and we have steps we can take if things are not working. Limited steps, but we have steps.
The review, which was requested through the EIC meeting, creates that gateway to look and review it. And we have got some in the paper. There'll be a couple of options that kind of give some options around that.
Yeah, you've already built in that safety valve.
So there are some reviews and some things that can happen. Personally, I'm anxious that we don't sell that everyone can get 2 permits. I think it's quite clear that a lot of people will only get 1 if they're even entitled to 1. So that would be my reservation about the communication on this. And I do see that we've had Lynn online. Well, I know Lynn's very, very good and has had a lot of experience in actually communicating what we're doing in the transport space to the public. So a lot of confidence in Lynn. Yep. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.